As creatures of the night, owls can seem mysterious and kind of spooky. Some people think of them as bad omens, harbingers of death, but they can also be symbols of knowledge and wisdom. Owls have fascinated people for millennia. Everyone knows what an owl is, even if you haven't actually seen one in real life. They're instantly recognizable with their large round heads, flat faces, and forward-staring eyes. We seem to be drawn to them because they resemble people. They're definitely birds, but they also kind of look like us. Owls are birds, and they do the same kinds of things that all birds do. Find food, preen their feathers, defend their territory, lay eggs and raise young. But unlike most other birds, owls do these things in the dark. Hi, I'm Kevin McGowan. In this course, we'll investigate just what makes an owl, and look at the diversity of owls throughout the world. We'll explore owls' superpowers that let them own the night all around the globe. We'll examine the day-to-day life or night-to-night life of owls, looking at courting and breeding habits, and how a baby owl goes from a downy fluff ball to an adult capable of hunting for itself. We'll listen in to the various hoots, toots, and screeches they make and talk about just what they're trying to say. We'll investigate the way that people have thought about and interacted with owls through the centuries, and look at how owls are doing today. We'll talk about how to find owls and what you can do to make a friendlier environment for owls near you. Owls are just plain fascinating creatures. I hope you'll join me in exploring the wonderful world of owls.
On today's show, we're joined by the course author of Bird Academy's online Owls course and human star of that video, Dr. Kevin McGowan from Cornell's Lab of Ornithology. Dr. McGowan is a renowned bird educator and author of many online courses about birds, bird identification, behavior, and biology. Kevin, it's a pleasure to have you back on Cornell Keynotes. It's been since 2020, and I'm really happy that you're in studio today.
Thanks. It's good to be here. It's nice to be in studio. 2020 was not the best of times.
No, that was horrible. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. Also joining us from the Safina Center in Setauket, New York, is ecologist and writer Carl Safina. Carl is author of Alfie and Me, What Owls Know, What Humans Believe. It's great to have you on the show as well, Carl. Thanks for joining.
Thanks very much. And if it hadn't been for the fact that we couldn't go anywhere in 2020, this book could not have been written.
Yeah, more to come on that in a minute. I want to thank you, our international viewers, for joining the conversation today. We will be taking your questions in the chat throughout. I'll be getting them here on my iPad. So submit those questions as they come up for you. We do have an interactive segment here. We're going to ask to kick up this QR code that we'll use to kick things off, because I have a couple things that I want to learn about our audience. So, to start, viewers, what is your experience with owls, screech owls in particular in this case? I know we have an international audience today. Screech owls aren't everywhere, but I think it's worth checking out for our North American audience. So the question is, have you ever seen a screech owl in the wild? The answers are yes, no, but I've heard them during the night, or I've never seen or heard a screech owl to my knowledge. So, Kevin McGowan, eastern screech owls are found throughout much of eastern North America, from the Rockies all the way to the Atlantic coast, and from southern Canada down to Florida and southern Texas. Vast territory we're talking about here. So I've heard hundreds of screech owls in my day, but I've never actually seen one, and I consider myself a pretty keen observer of birds generally as I move through the world. As course author of the online course, The Wonderful World of Owls, how have you studied and observed owls?
Well, I've tried to look for owls my entire life as an avid birder long before I was a professional ornithologist. I've spent time out at night looking for owls. I've spent time walking around in pine forest looking for poop on the ground, which a whitewash on the ground is a good way to find them. And so I've used it mostly as avocational, but I have had professional contact with owls too, mostly dead owls when I was in charge of the museum collection at the Cornell University Museum of Vertebrates. So I've skinned a few and made them into specimen. So I've seen owls from the inside and the outside.
That owl skinning story is pure gold, so let's save that for a little bit later if you don't mind. How's our audience doing? We have 37% of our audience say they've seen a screech owl. I don't know. Does that square with what you predicted? What do you think?
That's a little higher than I would have predicted, actually, but I guess it's an interested audience, so
Exactly.
you're not just normal people off the street. Right?
That's been my experience as well. Okay, well, let's check in with our audience, presuming that this is an international audience like we have described. So, globally speaking, there are almost 250 species of owls. In the U.S. and North America here, there are roughly 19, or exactly
Right,
19.
that's, yeah.
Have you seen all of the North American species?
I have not. Owls are hard because they are quiet and they go out at night, and so that's typically things that people miss when they go to an area. So I'm missing northern pygmy owl and spotted owl because I haven't spent enough time in those areas in the West where they occur. So
There's a rapidly developing story as it relates to species of owls globally. Can you tell me where we are with this?
well, in 3 weeks, the number of owls recognized species in the world will go from 246 to 247. That's because when the eBird Clements checklist gets published, the revision in a couple of weeks, there will be one new species added, and that's the Principe scops owl, which is a little owl that lives only on one island off the west coast of Central Africa, in Sao Tome and Principe, which it's only on Principe, and it was just discovered in 2016, formally described in the scientific literature last year, so now it makes it onto the checklist, and we get to 247.
News alert, 247 on the way. Carl Safina, I want to turn to you. Before the COVID pandemic hit a few years ago, in fact, back in 2018, you took or befriended a baby owl that was near death. You saw her return to full strength and back to health and named her Alfie. There's quite a story here. As a birder and ecologist, what had been your firsthand experience with owls prior to Alfie coming into your life?
Well, really, kind of bizarrely, when I was 14 years old, a music teacher of mine gave me a great horned owl. So that was my first up close and personal owl. But then I also, I co-founded a wildlife rehabilitation group on Long Island that is still going about 40 years later. And, had a variety of owls coming through there. And of course, as a birder, looking for owls, especially in the fall and winter, and then just encountering them here and there. The big difference between that and my experience with Alfie is that usually if you see an owl, you see an owl. It's very seldom that you get to really come to know a free-flying, free-living owl. And that's the extremely good fortune that I have had. And as I mentioned earlier, this coincided with the year 2020, which if my calendar had not gotten completely erased by COVID, I would not have been able to spend all the hours that I spent watching these birds in my backyard.
So tell us about the story. Let's go from Alfie, from first contact all the way through. I know you've got some cool visuals to share from the book with us here.
Yeah, sure. So let me get my cursor working here. So in 2018, somebody found this baby owl on their lawn. Of course, screech owls nest in cavities, so it couldn't have fallen out of its nest. Something dragged it out of the nest. Something was raiding the nest. I don't know what. Maybe a crow. Maybe a crow was flying with this baby owl and dropped it and didn't think it was worth coming back for. At any rate, this owl was very near death when found. The wildlife rehabilitator who was called and who went and cleaned it up and stabilized her didn't even know exactly what she had here and texted me and said, "Do you know what this is?" And I said, "Well, that looks like a screech owl, but it looks like a screech owl that I would guess is probably dead by now, but no." And in fact, working with her a bit, the little owl started to really thrive and was just an incredibly cute little bird, going from near death to getting healthy and doing really well. But I think there was one lingering problem that happened because she had almost died, and that was that she had a developmental delay. Her feathers didn't come in right on her wings. So two-thirds of each wing were bare. And I thought that our strategy was going to be as soon as she could fly, she could just fly away. We never had her in a cage. She was always able to move around at will, but when it was time for her to fly, she couldn't fly. So I kept her through her first molt, and I didn't know if she was going to get her feathers, but she did. They came in beautifully, and she turned into an absolutely gorgeous and really, really healthy little owl. We opened the door to the coop where I was holding her with a lot of trepidation because now this owl could fly suddenly really well, but had no real world experience with hunting or dangers, and I was afraid that she would just bolt and starve. That was my main fear, or she would just get killed. And she did, in fact, disappear for a week, and I didn't know what would happen. I didn't know what had happened. I thought, well, I guess that's it with this little owl. And then a week later, she suddenly came back one evening. So as you mentioned, we called her Alfie. She decided to create a territory that had our house as its center, and she decided that her day roost would be in this cascade of ivy on a gigantic maple trunk right outside our bedroom window. And in fact, this is shot right through our bedroom window, and there she is in her day roost. When I say our, this is the home crew. That's Jude Chula, my wife Patricia, and Katie. Patricia was a major factor in all of this. Alfie was free living, but she still had a very close relationship with me. So close, in fact, that she would often see me and come down low, get a little head scratch from me. I decided one day to just do something for fun, just have my camera out for a selfie and purse my lips, and she basically gave me a little preening kiss on the lips. At that moment, I was wondering if this was a real owl or a fairy princess. And if the kiss had turned her into a fairy princess, there obviously would have been a lot of trouble. But instead what happened was a love triangle. There was a suitor, a wild owl. Now, as a person who studied bird behavior, I know a lot of people would have said, and I probably... Well, I was wondering whether this owl was actually ruined for being an owl by her very abnormal childhood. But rather than just being what would be called imprinted and not being able to know she was an owl or know what to do, in fact, all of her instincts were completely intact. She responded very normally to this wild owl. We called him plus one. So plus one is on the left, Alfie is on the right. He is feeding her a moth. When I was a working ornithologist, I was trained to understand that courtship is a phase in their breeding cycle. But what I saw by watching the owls in my backyard for about 5 hours every day, because COVID meant I had nothing better to do, what I saw was that it wasn't a phase, it was a process and a progression. So this young female and this male had not known each other previously. They met and they were very tentative with each other at first. She was kind of hesitant, not very trusting. He gained her trust by doing this courtship feeding, among other things. And at first, many times I saw her not take the food, but then as the relationship that they had developed and their bond started to grow, and they knew each other better, she would accept the food quite readily. Then, of course, they began physical mating. And one of the other things I learned as a trained ornithologist is that birds don't have any facial expressions. Well, except when they do. You can see here the male plus one. He's on the left of the photograph, and he's looking a little uncomfortable with my presence, maybe a little skeptical. Alfie is completely relaxed. She's totally in love with him, totally trusts me. Everything is good with her, and you can just very easily read the body language here. So very interesting, a lot different than what I was taught, and that's what you get for watching carefully. I put a nest box up on the outside of my writing studio. There's Patricia looking for plus one while Alfie is looking out of the nest box. And of course, what happens in nest boxes is eggs. I was absolutely thrilled and delighted to see these eggs. Owl eggs of screech owls, they, as I said, cavity nesters, they can't roll out of the nest. And so they're very spherical and they don't need to be camouflaged. So they're very white. And then, much to my delight, they hatched. And, of course, Alfie being young and everything, I wasn't sure if they were fertilized, but they all hatched. That little ball of fluff on the top is all three of the newly hatched owls, compared to the size of a white-footed mouse that their father had delivered to the nest box. Very, very tiny little birds when they first hatch. They were growing fast. Here they are at 17 days. And during this period of time when they were growing fast, their father really adjusted his hunting strategy and his hunting hours. If you were to ask me, do screech owls hunt during the day, I would say, no, they don't. And if you had asked, do screech owls ever hunt chipmunks in the middle of the day, I would say, no, they don't, except when they do. So here he is on the left with a chipmunk that he caught at about noon one day, while those chicks were really at their peak need of food, fastest growing phase in their nestling life. And there he is delivering a sparrow in the middle of the night. One of the chicks sticking their head out the door to out of the nest entrance to meet him. And they always ate a lot of insects like moths, June bugs, and things like that. So they grew well. They stayed very healthy. There's Owl looking out of Alfie looking out of the box with one of her chicks on the landing platform there. And eventually, it became time for them to face the mysteries and the dangers of the world outside. Once they left, there was no going back. They never went in and out of the nest. Once they were out, they were out. The first thing that happened when they left the nest was they just basically fluttered to the ground. If I were to find a baby owl on the ground, I would think that, well, this owl doesn't, it's a very dangerous situation, very vulnerable, has no way to get back up into a tree. And what I found instead was that they have this amazing ability to just climb straight up tree trunks. Once they're off the ground, away from any prowling cats, or maybe a raccoon or a possum, and they're up in the tree, they seemed very safe, except that the first morning out, when the jays found them, they weren't very safe up in the tree. Here's a blue jay knocking one of those owlets out of the tree. The owlets repeatedly plummeted to the ground and repeatedly climbed up the tree during a morning when it was like basically a siege of blue jays and robins, having found those vulnerable, newly fledged little owls. But all of them survived. I thought, well, they're all different, so it would be nice if I could name them, except that they weren't different enough for me to tell them apart. So I just mentioned that to my wife, and she said, well, why don't we just give them a collective name? We'll call all the young ones the Who. So it was Alfie plus one and the Who in our backyard. We went from having one owl to having 5. And to make a longer story a lot shorter, Alfie became a really successful mother. She is now 5 years old. She has had 2 mates. She has raised 10 youngsters in 3 broods. And I still see her basically every day. And despite the fact that she is a fully functioning, very productive wild owl, she also remains magically tame. And a lot of the book, Alfie and Me, is really about me exploring how people have seen the human place in the natural world, in other cultures around the world through time, and why our Western view of our wild relatives is one of such duality. Why is it man and nature, us against them? Why do we have that view when most other cultures see such a unity in the diversity of nature and sense the relationships in the living world? I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm just going to tell you the story of the owls. And this is the book that resulted. It's been out for a week. It's been recommended by the New York Times and by Amazon. It's published by Norton. You can see more about me and this book and other books at my websites that are listed below there. So thanks very much, everybody.
Yeah, you bet. Carl Safina, thank you for that. And congratulations on the book publication. I know it's really tough to get a book published in the home stretch, and it's an exhausting process. But
it certainly is.
Yeah, congratulations. We'll share the Norton link so you can check out the publisher's site on Alfie and Me. Again, thanks for the lovely photos. One thing we didn't do, guys, is I want to call back to the poll results where we asked our viewers what kind of owls live in your area. So we've got great horned owl winning pretty solidly here, and the usual suspects, barn owls, barred owls, screech owls, and so on. Kevin McGowan, I should ask you, and Robert, Carl, feel free to chime in. Any jump out at you?
Yeah, a few. I mean, we clearly have some widespread audience here.
Yeah.
More pork, that's from New Zealand.
All right.
So that's pretty fun. Screech and barred great horn, those are mostly eastern North America. Western screech, tawny owl, that's going to be Europe. A couple of tawny owl votes there. Pygmy owl, there are a number of pygmy owls around the world, so that one's hard to know, including in the U.S. Little owls, also in Europe. I see great gray, snowy, and where was the hawk owl here? Northern hawk owl. That indicates someplace to the north, because those are all birds that here in central New York we do not see them very much at all, but we only see them during the winter when that happens.
Yeah, I saw my first snowy owl a couple of years ago. Breathtaking.
And an impressive animal, to be sure.
Couldn't believe it. I have a question here from Dan Presser. Carl Safina, you showed us the nest box that Alfie had multiple broods in and lived in. We have a question from Dan who asks, we have dedicated feeders for songbirds. I'd love to install an owl box, but I heard the owls eat songbirds. Should I install an owl box? Do you have to make a choice here, or what's the deal?
Well, I would say that for tens of millions of years, there were a lot of songbirds and a lot of owls. And we have songbird feeders and we have owls. They do eat some songbirds, but we still have plenty of songbirds. I don't think the presence of owls is really a problem for populations of songbirds. I think the presence of humans has proven to be a real problem for songbird populations. But I wouldn't worry about it. I think if you want to put an owl box up, you should. It hasn't hurt the numbers. We have jays, cardinals, sparrows, catbirds nesting and raising young in our backyard in the same yard that we have the owl box.
So we always call this just feeding at different trophic levels, in the chain of the food chain. It's like you're feeding up the food chain a couple of notches. So.
There you go. So, Kevin, one way to observe owls is to rescue and bond with an injured chick like Carl has, foster it back to health, become close neighbors in the process. But, Kevin, can you provide us with some tips on how and where to observe owls, both during the day and night? Because not having seen one, I could use some pointers.
Yeah, well, that's a fantastic experience that Carl got to have. That's just really super. I'm terribly jealous about being able to spend that much time with a wild animal. I mean, I've spent a lot of time with wild animals that I know as individuals because I abandoned 3,000 crows in my research, but not like that, not like part of the family. That's really so cool. The rest of us have to work a little harder. The main thing to remember is that owls are all over the place, but they're mostly out at night. And the easiest way to find an owl is to hear it, and then to sort of track it down, that kind of thing. So that's the biggest deal. And it's important to think about the habitat you're in when you're doing that, so that you know when if you're in a forest, you're likely to get a screech owl. If you're out on a in a field, you're not so much, not so likely. More great horned owls out in the open, and barred owls in the woods, that kind of thing.
We've titled today's event Apex Predator, Generous Companion. What are the attributes that makes owls the optimal predators? You had indicated in our pregame huddle that they have no competitors. They're at the top. I mean, what physical attributes and behaviors distinguish owls from other birds? We know that they fly silently, they have front-facing eyes, and so on. Tell us more.
Okay, well, owls do own their niche, so to speak, their position in the world, all over the world. They're found on all of the continents except Antarctica, and they own the night. They just own it because they're the biggest and the most prevalent nighttime flying predators in the world. They have no competition, really. Now, it's not to say that things don't eat owls. Things do eat owls. So, we witnessed Alfie that probably had a predator drag it out of the nest. But as far as being the things that fly at night and catch mammals and birds and insects and snakes and fish and things like that, the owls are at the top. And as you mentioned, there are some things, like they do fly silently. So they have some adaptations to make the air flow over the wings smooth and smooth out turbulence. They also have, if you think about it, with the feathers, you can hear bird flight. Now, you can hear a pigeon when it starts to fly. A lot of that noise is the feathers rubbing up against each other as they open and close the wings. Owls actually have kind of a plush velvet sort of on top of the wing feathers, so that they glide smoothly over the top of each other without making any noise, which is, that's something different that most things don't have. Now, I have to say is that one of the things that we're current thinking is that they fly silently so nobody can hear them coming, but in fact the reason they fly silently may be more important, that they can hear without, they're not disturbing their own hearing. And many owls are hunting primarily by sound, so that they're locating small mammals as they scurry about. In fact, we know that barn owls can catch free-running mice in the complete darkness just by sound alone. And so that's a big part of the silent flight, is so that they can hear better as they're moving along. So,
Carl, you had also mentioned that Alfie had done some hunting during the day, right? Picking up chipmunks in broad daylight. I want to pivot a little bit. So one cool thing that the Lab of Ornithology does, among many, at Cornell, is offer birders an awesome YouTube channel called Bird Cams. I don't know if any of you have seen these. I presume that a good chunk of our audience have. What does this do? Well, it offers a first-hand look into how birds live and nest. In this example here, let me kick one up. Sorry, let me back up a little bit. Here we go. So my bad. We have an example here of a couple barred owls. This is one of the barred owls cams that is available on the YouTube channel. We're going to share a URL for this because we see birds of all stripes and species in the bird cams. Super cool. So here we go. Here's some barred owls feeding on a midday snake. Wait till you get a load of this. So we've got a camera both in and out of the bird, the nest. Look at that. Substantial meal for two. Probably a great meal for four or more.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Barred owls are one of the owls that does feed frequently during the daytime, although they're predominantly nocturnal foragers. They do feed during the day. And yeah, that's a pretty good meal for the female. If she doesn't have chicks yet, if she's still sitting on eggs at that point, she's just going to swallow that thing whole. Yeah. That's the way owls tend to eat snakes. And I've had a little personal experience with that when I was in charge of the museum collection at Cornell, and we were doing some specimen preparation. And part of what we do is, when these are mostly roadkill animals that we had salvaged, and we got in a barred owl, and somebody was skinning the barred owl, and part of the specimen preparation is you take information off of it, and one of the things that we like to know is what were they eating. So I was working on my bird. I don't remember what I had, and all of a sudden, one of the students, just screams and jumps up in the air off to the side. I was like, "What?" And he had opened up this barred owl, and it had a snake that was coiled inside it. And when he slit the stomach open, it popped out just like a jack in the box. And that was the last thing that he expected, was a snake jump in his lap while he was skinning an owl. So it's really pretty funny.
That's a riot. In other owl cam videos, we see owls hunting during the day as well, snagging frogs and crayfish from ponds and creeks and so on. Carl, in addition to chipmunks, what else was on the diet for Alfie and her family and the Who?
Well, as far as food that she liked that I would provide, it's really anything that is animal in origin, from mice and insects that you would imagine to fried egg. She would even eat fried egg. But in her wild diet, it was an array of insects, rodents, and small birds. In warmer areas, they eat reptiles as well, small lizards, snakes. We don't have very many snakes around here. Probably screech owls do eat snakes. Another thing is that she will readily eat fish. And in the literature, screech owls are known to occasionally catch fish. I've never seen screech owls fishing. I have seen great horned owls fishing. And there are several owls that do either a lot of fishing in the wild or exclusively fishing in the wild in other parts of the world.
Yeah, those are called both fish owl and fishing owls, two different types of owls. About a dozen species all over the Africa and Eurasia.
Do they do the raptor thing where they dive and extract the fish from underwater, or is it more like opportunities on shore?
You know, the ones that I've seen video of that sort of walking around in the shallows, but yeah, they're mostly looking at. I think they're doing it visually, seeing the water disturbance and grabbing them. They're amazing. They actually have these particular owls, both the fish owls and the fishing owls, have little spicules on the bottom of their foot that helps them. That's unique to these owls. Ospreys have these too.
What's a spicule?
A spicule, a little spike. So they've got little spikes all over the bottom of their feet, and that helps them hold on to slippery fish. Other things like Alfie didn't have that, and none of the other owls have that. So it's pretty cool.
I was once fishing for largemouth bass at night in Connecticut, and I was using a lure that went along the surface, and a great horned owl swooped in and grabbed that lure. So that gives you a little bit of insight into one of the fishing techniques they use.
It's amazing.
It did not get hooked, I should hasten to add. Luckily.
That's good.
Yeah, exactly. Those surface lures seem to attract all kinds of anger and behavior from all kinds of animals, at least in my experience. All right, let's do a callback to our initial audience poll. Talking about screech owls at night, I think we would be remiss if we didn't play audio samples of their trills, their tremolos and whinnies, and of course they are beautiful and kind of haunting at the same time. Again, I've heard hundreds, but I've yet to see one. But let's check out some audio files here. We're going to kick some of these up. We're going to look at the All About Birds site. And I should just mention, we'll let these roll in the background. Let's get them started first. Great. So these are some examples of files. We'll let them play throughout here. And I should mention, All About Birds, great site, a good source for audio files and kind of comparing what you have heard, trying to identify what you've heard. And of course, nothing matches the Merlin app, which is available and free to the world. Do you want to set us up with a little Merlin promo and plug? I could do it, but you're a power user.
Well, the Merlin is an app that the lab has put out for free to help people identify birds all over the world. It's both an in-pocket field guide, but it also has tools to help you identify birds first just by questions of what you saw, color and and shape and size and where are you sort of thing. That was what we started with. And then they made a tool to identify birds from photographs, which works amazingly well. And they just recently came out with Sound ID so that you can hold your phone up and let it listen to the birds around you, and it'll tell you what birds are singing or calling. It's really quite remarkable. It's a lot of fun too, and we see a lot of people walking. When I walk the trails at the lab every day, at noon, I see bunches of people with their phones up, walking along, just trying to see what they're missing. It's like, oh, there's so many birds out there that I didn't know were there.
I'm that guy also. Carl, we had spoken the other day, and you had mentioned that that what we know about owl calls and songs and so forth are kind of wrong. There must be some conventional thinking around some of the trills and whinnies. Essentially, kind of two calls, two or three individual calls. What did you learn about owl calls in your experience with Alfie?
Yeah, there are mainly two calls. That's what you learn. And some people will say, well, this call is used for one thing, like territory, and the other one is used for contact. But in fact, there are more than two calls. There are, I would say, 5 calls. And the two main ones they're just used all the time. They seem interchangeable to me. Often they are used immediately, one right after another, and then switching back. So I don't think they're really used for discrete purposes. But a thing that you will hear and see is that if the owl's intended target, let's say her mate or me, are in view, she'll call very softly. And if they're not in view, she'll call very loudly. So the meaning of the call and what they're trying to accomplish with it changes by by the volume that they are putting into it. In other words, they understand what they're trying to accomplish by calling, and they understand if they need to broadcast it or they're just going to say, I'm here, you're there, we both know where we are. Sometimes if she's calling really loudly and I'm inside the house and I think, well, maybe she's calling for me because it's not the breeding season. I haven't heard her mate around for a while. Let me just go see if it's me that she wants to know where am I. I'll go outside, I'll call back to her, and I can just use my voice, or I can, sort of imitate a screech owl. She'll quiet down right away. So it's quite obvious then that she's just trying to get a sense of where everybody is. And the other thing is those other calls that I mentioned that you will never read about, these are calls that are used at very close range mostly with her family members, with her chicks and her mate. But in my case here, she uses them with me as well. And they're not the whinny or the tremolo that you will read about in field guides. They're much softer. They're more like I don't want to say a hoot because screech owls don't really hoot, but it's sort of an ooh 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 that is whistled. It's an odd little call. It doesn't carry very far most of the time, but occasionally, if the mates are actively trying to locate one another, they do sometimes use 2 of those notes together pretty loudly, and I can hear them at times kind of tracking each other as they move through the dark woods. So I would say there's more to it than what you read about what the calls and what they're used for, how they're used, what they mean. It's not quite as pat as you might be led to believe.
Yeah, good. Thanks. And, lucky you, once again, for having observed behaviors that aren't commonly known. I have some great questions.
A really great thing about the calling I just mentioned is that this one, what I call the most affiliative call, the one that's uttered in most intimate proximity, is a call that I've dubbed it the cozy call. Often she'll give that call from inside the nest when she knows that her mate or I am right nearby. And if I walk to the writing studio and she's on eggs, let's say, she's incubating, she hears my footsteps, she will utter that little call that basically says, I'm still here, I'm up in the nest. I know where you are. But it's not a call. If you were 30 feet away from a nest, you would never hear it. It's a very, very intimate call.
I love it. I've got some great viewer questions here that I just want to start hitting because these are great. A viewer needs a little bit of advice. Carl, maybe you can speak to this. I have an owl box used by squirrels and robins. Oops. It does not have a ledge by the entrance hole. Is that recommended? Did you have a ledge on your owl box?
Mine has a ledge. Only because the person who gave it to me made it with a ledge, but most of them and most of the plans that you see, they don't. They use the ledge a lot, but they don't need it. And often I'll see her come in at full speed and she'll just tuck her wings in and go right into the hole. I mean, it's really kind of unbelievable how they can do that, almost without slowing down or stopping. They just go right in the hole. So it does not need a ledge. What squirrels can be a huge problem in these boxes. They love them. And my solution was to put it on the side of that little house where my writing studio is. So squirrels cannot get to it. The only other thing you can do, I would recommend putting it on the side of your house or maybe attaching it to a window ledge on the second floor. The only other thing you can do is find a tree that is away from other trees so squirrels can't get there through the canopy, put a box up, and then put some aluminum around it so squirrels cannot climb up.
I want to switch gears. So another question from a viewer, Anna asks, and Kevin McGowan, I'll kick this one over to you. Anna asks, what is a typical territory size of screech owls? And are they noticeably aggressive toward each other? You had spoken about them being the apex predator, but also competitive among owls.
Well, yeah, and screech owls are interesting. They have, I'm not sure how big the territory is exactly, maybe an acre or two, or a little bit, certainly I'd say less than 10 acres for the Americans in the audience. But the screech owls are territorial. They do call and seem to react to other birds, but it turns out that some studies have shown that the males are actually might be two males sharing a larger territory, where and this depends on how much food there is and how many holes there are, but that they actually can be polyterritorial or have two males in one territory, which is not that commonly known about many birds. Actually, so sort of interesting on that extent.
I have a question from Tim. This is kind of related. Besides the jays and thrushes that harass the owlets, are owls at risk of attack by raptors because they're hunting in the daylight outside of their niche? Any thoughts or comments on that kind of exposure? Carl Safina.
Yeah, I'm always worried about Cooper's hawks. We have Cooper's hawks pretty regularly here. I know of two nests within 2 miles of my house, so they show up. Alfie sometimes takes a bath in broad daylight. She sometimes takes a dust bath, also in broad daylight, and then she's just on the ground with her wings fanned out. I think she'd be very vulnerable to a Cooper's hawk. But also, barred owls eat screech owls at night, and great horned owls sometimes will eat screech owls at night. So being active at night does not, as you mentioned earlier, does not fully, free them from the danger of being attacked by another predator.
That's absolutely true. Owls eat other owls. That's for sure. I've seen barn owl carcass that was killed by a great horned owl, and my kids were trying to call up the saw-whet owls, which is a little owl that we get here in the fall and winter, and they were playing saw-whet owl tapes. And a barred owl came in, and it's like, yes, I'm interested in finding saw-whet owls too. It's like, yeah, call in, go for your food.
Yeah. I have a two-part question here. Viewer Jeff kind of tipped me to this one, so I'm going to add my thing here. But is there any indication of the influence of climate change is affecting the northward movement of screech owls as a breeding species? And I guess more broadly, this goes to a question that I prepared too, which is, What do we know about human and owl interaction or connection through history? What can you tell us about our impact on owls' environments? What are ways that we affect owl populations and species?
Well, we've had a lot of effect on owl populations through the years. As far as northward movement, I think the screech owls are kind of bumping up against the boreal forest, and that's been until the boreal forest starts to creep further north, I wouldn't expect much more motion. But certainly we've been interacting with owls forever. Obviously, the biggest thing over the last couple hundred years is land change, devastation of the forests, and I mean, the Europeans basically cut down every tree east of the Mississippi when we got here, and huge habitat destruction. And of course, climate change is something that's coming up. But the other thing that we can do is people are, in fact, there are programs to actually help owls and put boxes out where they need them. And there are some programs. I know there's a successful one in I think in Israel and somewhere else in the Middle East and in California, where they're putting up barn owl boxes to encourage barn owls to be around agricultural fields. Instead of putting out poison to kill the rats and things like that, they're encouraging barn owls, which I think that's a great thing to do. You eat somebody. There's actually a program out there. I just saw this. It was something about rats and about raptors eat more rats than pesticides or something like that. I forget how it works exactly, but people are trying to promote this as a positive way for people to interact with owls.
Carl, in your experience as an ecologist and situated down in Long Island, do you have any comments or experience on human encroachment on owls' environments or birds broadly?
Yeah, well, one of the things around my backyard, I live in the suburbs. I live kind of at the edge of the suburbs, where we have some wood lots around us. But if you drove down my street, which is literally called Main Street, you would just think you're in the suburbs. And the woods behind my house, there's about 30 acres of woods behind my house. They're almost entirely Norway maple. It's not a native tree. It does not make the kind of seeds and nuts that mice can really do well on. And it's not very good habitat for screech owls, for instance. So, the loss of a lot of our native trees, or conversely, planting native trees like oaks is good for owls. It's good for, it's good for what they eat, and therefore it's good for them.
Hey, I have a viewer question from Natalie. What do you think about the spotted owl and barred owl hybrid? The sparred owl. I don't know anything about this, so I'm just kicking this out there. Do you think it's a negative for spotted owl conservation?
Oh, it's absolutely negative. So the deal is that spotted owls are on the West Coast. Primarily, they live in mature coniferous forests, and we've been cutting them down like crazy, and so that's been affecting their populations. But it also turns out that the barred owl, which is an eastern species in the same genus, very closely related to the spotted owl. Barred owl has been moving westward for maybe 100 years or so, something like that. And eventually, as we went across the prairies and planted trees in the open Great Plains and all of that, the barred owls followed those trees westward, and they finally hit the western forests, and now they're actually moving into areas where spotted owls breed. And they are a big threat to the existence of the endangered spotted owl. It's not just the hybridization. They're also outcompete them for territories and things like that. And in fact, there's a program in place to try to remove barred owls from certain areas to try to protect the spotted owls, because the spotted owls are losing. When they're face to face with this new competitor, they're losing. And we would like to not have them disappear. So.
Yeah, right. So human Carl Safina, go ahead. You had a comment.
Yeah, I'd like to say I've been calling this the worst problem in conservation because, first of all, humans created a gigantic habitat mess that was continental. I've been on the West Coast, and I've written a lot about those forests, and I've seen the extent of clear cutting there. We've just demolished so much habitat for so many things. And now what we're doing is we're blaming an owl that went west because of us for, living and breeding, which is what they do. It's none of this is their fault. And I think that to shoot barred owls in the hopes of saving spotted owls after, and that's not the fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is that we destroyed how they lived and where they lived. And now, to kill one species in the hopes of preserving another, I think is a no-win situation. And as far as PR, the ability of people to understand why killing one owl is a good idea if the idea is that you like the other owl, I just think it's a complete loser. I think it's a terrible situation. It's no win. The real take-home message is that people created an awful situation that endangered one owl and has let another owl expand. But the idea that the only thing that we can do is keep killing barred owls, which I don't think can work in the long run, I think is just not a good way for people to understand why conservation is important. I just think it's a very, very unfortunate situation, and I think it's a no-win. So that's why I've been calling it the worst problem in conservation.
Yeah, thank you for that answer and chiming in, and thank you, Natalie, for that question as well. We are nearing the end here. Kevin McGowan, I want to ask you, how is what we've been talking about today? What can we bring into the coursework, the wonderful world of owls that you've produced? How does what we've discussed today kind of fit into the larger educational picture as you see it as it relates to owls?
Well, in our course, the basic premise of it is to try to introduce people to owls. People know owls, love owls, but they don't really know that much about owls. Certainly we all are born ignorant, and when I did not have a whole lot of experience. Nobody ever gave me a great horned owl when I was a kid. My first one was just a screech owl in my neighbor's city backyard.
Yeah.
But in the course, we try to introduce people to the variety of owls around the world. Again, we've talked a lot about about what makes owls special and then, what makes an owl an owl. We also do go through the whole family life of owls, talking about how the mates work together and raise their young and things like that. We talk a lot about vocalizations and what they mean and how the birds use them. And we do go into conservation and how people can help owls, or what are the main sorts of problems. So a lot of what is in the course is we've touched on a number of those issues.
I'm glad we've touched on the conservation component. That's important. Ultimately, what we're doing here is education, right? We want our viewers to learn something and take something away.
Yep.
Thanks for that course preview. So we're going to drop the URL in there. Carl Safina, going from your music teacher, having given you a great horned owl, presumably for you to work on your tone or something. I don't know what problem was being solved there, but I want to congratulate you on taking that journey all the way to the publication of Alfie and Me. What's next for you? Are you going on a book tour? What are you doing? Are you already got another project in the works, or what's cooking?
I don't have another project in the works yet, because with this book being only a week old, I have lots and lots of talks lined up. I do have a list of other books I'd like to write, but I'm not going to get to them for a few months. And it's really great that people are enjoying this book so far.
That's good to hear. Good. Well, take it easy a little bit, and we hope to see you sometime in the near future. Carl Safina, Kevin McGowan, thank you too for joining me. Viewers, you as well. So remember that this is going to be recorded, available shortly afterwards. So if you are friends or colleagues, you want to share this with anybody, please do so. And I want to thank you for your involvement. Thanks, everyone, today. We'll see you at the next keynote. Thanks.
Thank you. It's been great.
Yep, it's been fun.